Claude Code is the absolute king of the hill when it comes to AI coding. And that is a hill that I'm willing to die on. But the thing is, most people are only really using 10% of its power, because there's actually a few hidden features inside of Claude Code that, unless you've done some real digging, you're probably not aware of. And in this video, I'm gonna break down the ones that can impact your coding workflows the most. So let's see if we can get this bad boy done in less than 15 minutes. I'm gonna break down each feature and how to use it in the context of a real project. And so this video is gonna be great for you if you're already using Claude Code, Gemini CLI, Cursor, Windsurf, or some other agentic IDE, and you want to really level up how you are using them. Because we are rapidly moving toward a world where learning to wield the context of what you are building is the next valuable skill set that you need to have. So optimizing how we do that is critical. In fact, a quick warning, feature 5 alone, you may never look at your loved ones the same ever again. I jest, or do I? All really dope stuff. So let's hop in. Okay guys, so we have this super simple boilerplate code for an app that I have been thinking up. And obviously the UI is very ugly. Now the idea behind it is an app blocker that, well, lets you choose the apps you want to block. And then in order to actually unlock your phone, you have to complete like productive educational type content. So we're gonna use this app for showcasing some of these features. So first, let's start off where all great things start, the beginning. My old workflows used to look something like this. Go to Claude manually, run it through a series of different prompts, grab the outputs, send those outputs into some next prompt that I have, chain that along for a few times, and then eventually, after step 5, 6, 7, 8, send it to a tool that can handle doing actual task generation or code generation. Kind of a pain, though you would end up getting good outputs at the end, but still, it was a major workflow where you would waste 2, 3, 4, 5 hours every single week having to repeat that process and switch context all the time. Not to mention, it can be kind of hard to keep track of the different variations of the prompts you've used and which ones helped solve certain situations and get you better outputs. Well, one of Claude Code's surprisingly great features is planning. Now, if you want to actually get started with Claude Code, that video will be linked somewhere around here. So we're just going to get into actually using it. Now, a lot of people, especially vibe coders, make the mistake of just giving a super loaded prompt to Claude or Gemini and just expecting that it's going to be able to make you this amazing, spectacular thing in one shot. Now, what I found is that giving thinking steps before we get to action steps actually gets you a much better result, because all of the tokens that we have to work with are being focused on the specific context of thinking about the problem and the best way to implement a solution, instead of using those tokens to generate the actual code for that solution. So imagine a world where you have 120,000 set tokens that you can use. Well, we would want to use them all for thinking about the problem as opposed to writing the actual code for the problem. And when we do that, we tend to get a lot more well thought through outputs. Then once we have a robust solution thought out, we can start implementing it. So for this app, we can see we have Tailwind configured, but the app was still looking pretty ugly. So let's have Claude take some reference images, maybe an example style guide, some prompt guardrails, and see what it can actually plan out for us. Now, the way that we're going to do that is when we're in our Claude Code terminal. So we have different modes and we can hit Shift Tab to toggle between them. One is like a generalized help mode, and then we have a auto apply these edits mode, and then we have a planning mode, which we're going to use. Now, I tried to skip this process recently to see if the system could actually vibe code one shot without this planning stage. And the results were pretty miserable. I lost 6 hours of my life and eventually had to scrap the project and start over. Now, proper planning would have avoided that disaster altogether. Here's the brutal truth. If you do not spend 75% of your time planning, you're going to end up spending 95% of your time fixing and then giving up. And fixing ain't fun. Serious professionals spend 80% of their time planning, and then the code flows through from there. So if you want to build workflows that mimic that outcome of being professional, well, then you need to mimic the process and the content within the process, i.e. planning. So as we can see with this output, now it has generated me a pretty robust, comprehensive plan. If I was to simply have pasted in this prompt from above and just sent it straight into editing mode, I wouldn't have gotten anything near this detailed. And it also gives me the chance to check out what is going on and make sure I agree with it, or if I want to, continue the planning. Now, obviously, when we're building more technically involved features, maybe you have back-end data models being edited, maybe you have front-end components and different things are happening, you're going to want to really make sure this is refined and dialed in. So once we say, yes, we want to proceed, it's going to go off and it is going to start building this thing. Now, once we've got a plan, then what, right? How do we actually maximize the implementation of this plan? Yes, you guessed it, feature 2. Feature 2, probably one of my favorite features, Claude Code commands. You know, sometimes it feels like you go through some badass series of prompts, getting these dope outputs. You're just like in total beast mode and you feel like you're the shit and nothing can stop you. The only practical downside to that is that it takes time, right? And you got to be super locked into what you are doing. Now, if you have a job or if you run a business, you know that time is not exactly a luxurious commodity that we have to just throw around. I'll give you an example from one of my own workflows. Anytime I get like a UX or a UI that I'm not really happy with, I tend to go through this series of steps. I ask the language model to dial it in based on, number 1, my app's style guide. Number 2, brainstorming the various states that this screen could exist in. What happens if there's empty data? What happens if there's a failure? What happens if there's a bunch of data? How does that all change what the user is seeing and what the user is experiencing? What are my overall UX best practices and guidelines that the app should be following at all times? Number 4, if you build new components, go lint them so that when I go to build this thing, it's not broken. Number 5, can you confirm that the changes were actually made and that they specifically comply to numbers 1, 2, and 3 that we just went through? 6, can you go through and now evaluate everything you just went through against the objective standard one more time, right? So we can put it through an evaluator optimizer loop. And then number 7, if it's all well and good, commit the changes. Now, the standard process for that usually entails me giving a prompt and having to sit here to wait for it to finish what it's doing and then guide it to the next stage. Right? So I have to manually open up the screen, see if I like the change, give it feedback based on what I see, let it make the change, open it up again, check now to see if it's good, right? And just have that back and forth process. So if we sat here and honestly calculated how much time that takes, probably 30 minutes every time we need to go through one of these iterative cycles to really dial in on something we're happy with. 5 times a week, we'll say conservatively, we're talking about 3 weeks of lost time over the course of a year. And again, that's a conservative estimate. Just because we're repeating a manual process. Well, custom Claude commands help us put an end to that frustration. So inside of our project, we have this directory that's .claude, okay? And so if we open that up and right-click on it and make a new folder, we can call this folder or this directory commands. Now, inside of this, any markdown file that we create, so we could call this UI UX improver.markdown, and I can put that process that I was just describing to you guys in there, right? We can come in and we can look at it. It's exactly what I just said. So any markdown file that we put inside of this commands folder can be accessed via our command line right here. So if I was to go exit out of this, for example, and then I was to start Claude code back up in the terminal, and I hit this / symbol, we're going to see that now I have this UI UX improver, okay? Now, if I was to say go on that, I can come through, I can hit /, I have my UX UI improver, and then I can say analyze my app home screen and improve it to conform to our UX principles. So now when we go to the command line and we run that, we can access that saved prompt and kick off Claude Code, executing through all of those steps. Now, if you want access to a library of these things that I'm going to be building out and giving away in July, you can join my school group in the description below for free ahead of time so that you're the first one there when I release them. So this isn't just about saving prompts, right? It is a force multiplier where we can take existing workflows and scale our ability to loop through those without us needing to be there. And it's not just about time saved. It's also about the consistency of our outputs. And so perfect example, as we told it to reference our UX best practices, it's now gone through and it's found all of these opportunities that were otherwise missed. And why were they missed? Because it all comes down to context. And the fact of the matter is, these language models in their present state are always going to drop context at one point or another. So you need to build a habit of looping back through things that you know are important and making sure it still considers those things as you build. Because look, when it's 11 p.m. and you're tired and you're in front of your computer and you're trying to fix something, you are inevitably going to skip steps of your process. Maybe you get through 2 of the 7 steps and then you go to bed and you wake up tomorrow, you're not 100% sure of where you left off. And next thing you know, the project's out in la la land and you've missed some important steps that you would otherwise go through. So part of this is making sure that the work you do at 11 p.m. is just as much quality and done just as well as the work that you do at 11 a.m. Now, another big part of this is making sure we're set up for success to begin with, which is why feature 3 is a serious Claude Code non-negotiable. So feature 3 is initializing your Claude project to provide documentation to the system. One of the more frustrating things that you can experience when you're doing AI coding is solving a problem in one coding session and then running into that same exact problem again and again and again. And sometimes it feels like Claude Code has simply forgotten, because when you clear the context, it literally does. So one of the things that was great about cursor rules, for example, was the ability to kind of steer the ship with your own conventions. Well, Claude Code gives us an even better version of cursor rules called the Claude Markdown file. So to get started, simply type /init into your Claude terminal and then hit enter. And what this is going to do is it is going to initialize this claude.markdown file and is going to actually document your code base and place it in that file. So once this thing goes through and generates, again, it's going to create a comprehensive overview of our project, from terminal commands that do certain things, the actual architecture and tech stack, the core architectural patterns of our project, important user flows, and other important pieces of information like our component patterns, how things are being built, what the data models look like, how the navigation is meant to work, how the testing is meant to work, and so on. And so some things that you would want to consider adding in here would be things like our coding conventions, any important environment setup details, solutions to common repo bugs or problems. You probably get the idea. Things that are important to be there every single time it goes to work with your project. What are those core base rules or pieces of information or context that you think it will be appropriate for Claude Code to have every single time it goes to do something? So the key is to really keep this concise and powerful, because again, context is king. The last thing you want to do is to come in here and just start loading it up and bloating it with a bunch of stuff. You should really think through, is this information something that I would want every single prompt that goes through to Anthropic servers to have? Now, one really cool feature here is that we can incorporate new documentation on the fly. Now, let's say for this app that we wanted to add some agentic capabilities. And so we wanted to make sure that it had all of the documentation it needs for Crew AI. Well, we could tell Claude that every time it plans a new feature using Crew AI, it must check the most up-to-date documentation using the Context 7 MCP. So if I hit this pound symbol, we can see that it goes into this memorize mode. So if I came through here now, I could say, every time you enter the planning phase for a feature that includes Crew AI, you must check the most up-to-date documentation using the Context 7 MCP server. Enter. And now we have the option of where we want to save it. So is this project specific? Is it a user specific configuration? For this case, I'm going to say that this is project memory. And now if we come back to that Claude markdown file, we can see that it has added this memory for the Crew AI integration. So every time it enters the planning phase, it's got to check using the Context 7 MCP server to make sure that it's not just making up random documentation that doesn't exist. Because there's a big hidden cost in context switching, meaning every single time you need to break out of your workflows to go pull documentation, have to tell it a specific prompt saying, hey, and by the way, don't fuck up again. And like, can you please actually use the real documentation that I want you to use? Right? Those small little things eat away at us, right? It's like death by 1,000 cuts. Every 5 minutes that you have to take to go do something that could have been just integrated into your workflows automatically really kills your progress over time. Lost time plus inconsistent outputs makes for AI coders a very sad man. I don't know if that even made sense. But speaking of the Context 7 MCP server, that brings us to feature number 4. Claude Code can in fact interact with MCP servers. Probably the single most frustrating thing that can happen is when your AI coding tool uses a very outdated version of a tool, or when it just makes something up entirely that doesn't even exist. I once had Cursor make up an entirely not real series of steps to configure a fast API server. And I had to spend 30 minutes sweating it out, wondering why my server wasn't starting up, wondering what had gone wrong, cursing myself to kingdom come, only to realize eventually that the functions it was giving me to instantiate the server were not actually real. Now, obviously, MCP servers like Context 7 help solve that problem. And a cool fun fact is that Claude Code can actually integrate directly with other MCP servers. In my 5 MCP servers for vibe coding glory video, you saw 5 of those servers that I think are huge force multipliers for people that like to do AI coding. But it's not immediately clear, especially to beginners, that you can actually use those inside of Claude Code. And it's pretty easy. So let's check it out. So in order to do this, all you need to do is go to your root project directory where you're using Claude Code and create this file .mcp.json. And then once you have that file, you're just going to paste in like a basic MCP server configuration, right? Where we specify, hey, these are the MCP servers, and then we have an object for every single server. So this one is my Context 7 server. If I wanted to use Playwright or Perplexity or Exa AI, I could just come through here, add a comma, and then keep adding on more and more and more MCP servers. Now from here, you would just need to exit out of Claude Code, start it back up, and then boom, it is immediately ready to use inside of your project. And we could confirm this by typing /MCP, and it's going to show you all of the MCP servers that it's currently connected to, right? So let's say that we wanted to use Clerk for authentication. We could say, I'd like to use Clerk for authentication in my Expo app. Please use Context 7 MCP to fetch the documentation and build an implementation plan. And now, boom, we're going to pop up. We're going to see that the tool is being used. We're going to see the specific MCP and the function or the tool of the MCP that it's trying to use. We can say, yes, continue. It's going to go through, and it is going to eventually pull this documentation for Clerk in from Context 7. And then once it has that, it's going to use that documentation that it now has in order to build this for our project. Now let's think back to those custom commands that we are making for the UX and the UI of our project. So if you remember in step 5, we had this option for confirm the changes are applied. Now, what it would do if we left it just like this is it would actually just look at the code and make sure that it did the thing that it thought it was doing. But what we could do, for example, now is say, use the Playwright MCP server to make sure your outputs conform to the plan from steps 1 to 3. And then what we could do is we can come down here to step 6 where it grades. If the grade fails with a score of less than 6 out of 10, redevelop a plan, implement the plan, and test again with Playwright until the score is above a 7. Right? So now inside of these command files that we have, we can be kicking off MCP servers that do specific things. So for example, a step here could be that maybe in our planning stage, we use Perplexity or Exa AI to actually go out and research present best practices for building, for example, an AI agent, right? Maybe you're someone that's not a super mega talented AI engineer. You want to be able to build apps with agentic capabilities. Or maybe part of your debugging process involves actually going out and researching this issue on like GitHub, for example. Point being, anywhere that you might consider using an MCP for a manual process, you can now integrate them directly into custom commands, right? So how cool is something like this, where we can give it a style guide and really clear UX guidelines? We can have it implement that plan, grade itself against the plan, take an actual snapshot of its adherence to the plan, and then use the language model's multimodal capabilities to give itself a grade and continue that process until we get an output that is actually high quality. These types of evaluator optimizer loops are really, really cool, and Claude commands help make that happen for us. A lot of the time, I've just wished that I could have like 10 instances of cursor going at the same time. Like I see all these things that need to be done, and it's like, man, I really got to sit here and just go piece by piece, letting these things roll out their changes one by one and then move to the next one when I'm ready. Now, one of the coolest features that is actually somewhat ambiguous, especially if you are a beginner and you downloaded this thing because you heard about it and you started coding with it and you're like, wow, this is awesome. One of the most totally amazing features that you might not be aware of is that you can actually kick off or spawn multiple sub-agents at the same time. And the way that you do it is just by telling it to do it. What I mean is you can have multiple instances of Claude code coding at the same exact time. Now, it might be obvious, right? You might be saying, well, yeah, obviously I could see why that would be useful, that I can do 3 things at the same time. But let me break down like a real concrete scenario for this. Let's say you're working on your new project and you notice a few things. Number 1, the UX that I got, it's not really conforming to my guidelines, right? It's there, but it's not wowing me. Number 2, my clerk authentication seems to be working, but it's not actually storing the users into my database. Number 3, the Stripe subscription seems to be working, but it's not actually storing the subscription plan ID in my database. And number 4, I've got this really annoying bug where every time I type into an input box, it unfocuses it. Well, traditionally, you'd have to tackle those things one at a time, right? And depending on where you are in your day, you might not want to do some of the bigger bugs and you want to just tackle all the smaller ones, whatever the case might be. Now, last week, I literally had this exact same situation when I was working on my prompt wallet app. I had 3 to 4 dope features that I wanted to build out, and I had 10 to 15 like really small bugs. There were some like UI things. That focus thing that I just said was an actual bug. And there were probably like a dozen or so other small issues. That's like, I know what that is, but I've got a big backlog of these things that are just going to take a few minutes for me to fix. Well, the old me, it would have been a full day of doing stuff, right? I'd be trying to work on these new features. Maybe I'd be trying to knock out all these bugs. I'd be inadvertently creating new bugs as I'm trying to do that, right? Full day of work ahead of me, basically. But new me? Spawn up a bunch of sub-agents to go tackle each one of these tasks, and then go into YOLO mode while I go grab a cup of coffee from down the street, and then I come back and everything is done. That's not a 2x productivity increase. That is a n number of productivity increase, 10x plus for sure. Now, there's 2 ways we could think about doing this, right? Number 1 is we could actually just come over here and create a new terminal every single time, right? So I could come in here, I could say Claude, I could come in here, I could do another Claude, and I could use this to solve each of those problems, right? So in this specific case, I have 3 different versions of this up that could all go out there and start making changes. Or another option, we can literally tell Claude to kick off sub-agents for each of those problems. So let's look at an example of that. We could say, kick off sub-agents to address each of the following. Research actual standard UX best practices from FANG-style companies and B2C SaaS giants and grade our implementation against it. Number 2, check out our style guide and ensure our app conforms to it screen by screen, kicking off sub-agents for each screen. Research performance optimization for Expo and see how our app structure can be optimized further. And then number 4, use the Context 7 MCP to check out Clerk's payments system and build a plan, but don't implement it, for using them instead of Stripe. Place the results in Clerk Exploration.Markdown. And now we can see it is kicking off sub-agents with a task to handle each of our list items. Now we could take this even further, right? We could instruct the system to actually create new branches, right? Create new branches so that we're not worrying about files inadvertently running into each other and overwriting each other's changes. There's a lot of cool stuff that we could add on top of this process. And we can see this now in progress where these things are running in parallel and they are all rocking it. Now, the cool piece is that we can obviously start layering all of these different features together. Maybe when we kick off in planning mode, we actually kick off a custom command that recursively goes through and does some really robust, thoughtful, in-depth planning for our project. And maybe in that custom command process, we're actually using MCP servers that go out and do deep research for our project. Maybe it's researching the main problems that we are probably going to run into here and the different design or architecture patterns that will actually help us overcome those challenges as our app starts to grow. And then it can go off and spawn different sub-agents to grade that plan against what we actually needed done, start actually doing the plan, and then maybe even start building the scaffolding or asking the user questions to clarify based on the gaps it found in its process. So these things start to become super, super, super powerful when combined together. So that's it, guys. 5 Claude Code features and workflows that will 10x your outputs overnight. So I have a question for anyone still watching. I'm trying to determine the next directional push for my channel for the rest of 2025. And so I have a question. If you can comment below, what would you rather see? Number 1, learning how to build and deploy production-ready AI agents using actual code instead of tools like N8N and things like that. Or number 2, back-end business-oriented automations and workflows to help you actually scale the operations of your business or whatever it is that you are building. Or number 3, maybe a combination of both or something else entirely. Let me know and make sure to subscribe to the channel either way so that you can stay up to date on all of those awesome things we're going to be building together. So that is it. I'll see you in the next video.